Hi, and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week, we are talking all about how to be true to yourself. Now, so many people are unsatisfied, unhappy, or just plain worn out because they've created an identity and a life for themselves based on a huge lie and a fake story about who they really are. In this teaching, you'll learn what's stopping you right now from being true to yourself and how you can start living as the authentic and real you. Okay, David, so what stops us from being true to ourselves?
So this gives us a good opportunity to talk about the inner child. And for those of you new to the channel, just let me quickly explain to you what I mean when I give you the label of the inner child. Now, it's a part of your mind. It's not outside of you. It's not separate from you. It is a part of your mind. You may already recognize this part of your mind and give it a name like ego, emotional mind, the negative you, the inner critic, the devil that sits on your shoulder. It's got many names. And I'd like to offer you the label of the inner child, to think of that part of your mind as an inner child. And this allows you to kind of look at things slightly differently. And instead of being kind of in a fighting mode against that part of your mind, it could allow you to look at yourself as perhaps the spiritual parent, thinking and talking to a part of your mind like a spiritual child, like your child. And this part of your mind was developed during your childhood and your environment between the ages of 6 years old and 9 years old. In my experience, this is a very important time because this was a time in your life when your emotions were fully developed and you were aware of your emotions, but your cognitive reasoning was not. And so when you went through dysfunctionalities, and that could be many and varied, and it could be one or it could be a series, then you were creating a very strong, powerful, intense, overwhelming, whatever word you want to call it. I call them red light feelings. You may call them fear, scared, anxiousness, but you were creating these very intense feelings, but you did not know how or what was happening. In fact, at that age, most children believe that the feelings are something coming in at them from the external, normally from their parents or families or teachers or bullies at school. They believe that they're inflicting their feelings onto them, and this then puts them into a victim mode. And this part of your mind is like a kernel in the middle of a nut, stuck tight. So even though the other part of you matures quite naturally and you become who you are as a human being, we have this little part of your mind that's kind of locked in, put the bunkers down as if you like, and frozen. When we're talking about these type of things, the identity, who you are, how you view yourself, Alex, this really hits on the inner child, and it allows us to look at it from a slightly different variation than the way we normally look at it.
So, are you saying that when we're young and we experience something dysfunctional, so it could be bullying, it could be being left out, it could be losing friends, it could be some form of abuse, as you say, many and very different ways that we can experience dysfunctionality. As a child, we believe we're a victim, and does that then become our story, which then affects our identity as an adult, that inner child story?
Yes, it's kind of a process, and it's nice to look at it from this idea as an identity, because a lot of clients will come to me and they'll say, I am. They'll say the three lies, we call it, don't we? We talk about it every week. I am not good enough. I am unable to cope. I am unworthy or unlovable. And so what has happened is that when you were a child, you were encountering or encountered just something you couldn't get your head around. It was above your pay grade, if you like. You experienced horrendous feelings. Never underestimate the emotional feelings that you experienced. So here we have a child experiencing these horrendous feelings, but not being able to speak to anyone to understand what these feelings are. So they're left to their own resources. And remember, this child now is 6, 7, 8, 9. And it could be, you might say, well, why don't they speak to their parents? But unfortunately, for a lot of my clients, it's the parents are part of the scenario that's creating the red light feelings. And so the inner child turns in on themselves. And instead of looking outward, because they're experiencing the feeling, intense feelings, they then say, well, I have to protect myself. There must be something wrong with me. The problem lies with me, not because they can't analyze that perhaps your parents were dysfunctional. Why would you question your parents? You're a child. You believe in your parents. One client said to me just yesterday, they're one step away from God for a child. As you grow older, you realize, because you become a parent and you understand that we make mistakes as parents. But as that 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old child, you can't question your parents. So you're in this very difficult position where you know something is wrong. And a child, if you've got physical children, wants to place the blame. Who do I blame for this? I can't blame my parents. I can't blame a teacher, can I? My mum and dad told me the teacher's always right. I can't blame them. So it must be me. And so the child turns around and blames themselves.
So how does that self-blame as a child, which I can understand from what you said, I can see how that happens when a child believes they don't have any options or they haven't got the emotional or psychological kind of maturity to analyze what's happening to them. But how does that self-blame affect our identity as an adult or our us not being true to ourselves? We're talking 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years later. How's that affecting us now as an adult?
I'm so pleased to be able to walk you through this process. This is why this is such a good question, a good life lesson to learn. So the first step is always remember what I said. The inner child does not accept that they create the emotion. I say this on every video. You can probably repeat it with me. You are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim. Now, a child does not accept that. And many of my clients, and even you who've been watching our sessions, you may intellectually accept and go, oh, of course I create my emotions. Of course I do. They don't float around the room, every emotion as I create. But I'd like you sometimes to sit quietly and see if you can contact that part of your mind that I'm calling the inner child and ask that part of the mind whether they believe that they create the emotions. And I can say to you, even with clients who've come to me and gone through the videos and just need a bit of an assistance, when we get down to it, that part of the mind does not believe that they create the emotion. So here you got the starting of the story. Now the inner child is experiencing emotions. He has to or she has to justify it. So they start to come up with a story that makes sense to them. This is normally the victim story, or what I sometimes call, and many of my clients out there will smile now, I call the poor me story. And what the child does, it creates the story to make sense of their perception of the situation. And their perception of the situation, like all children, they want to go, it's not fair. it's unjust. It shouldn't be this way. I want it the way I want it. I want things how I want it, and I want it now. And we've done many videos on these, what the inner child says. But that's why I love this terminology of the inner child. Because remember, that part of you is acting and thinking and behaving like a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old child. And so what it's doing, without you realizing, it's creating a story, a view, a filter of life, a filter of the reality of life. So instead of accepting reality the way it is, it's looking at it through the lens of the story.
Yeah.
And so this now story becomes very real to it. And many of my clients then use what happens when you have the poor me story as evidence of being poor me. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, or the new terminology that Alex told me the other week as confirmation biased. So when you see everything through the poor me lens, then everything becomes poor me. You always look at it that way.
Can I just stop you there? Because when you say that the inner child obviously sees things in, as a child, we see things in very black and white. We want things the way we want them. We want things immediately. We don't want to experience any discomfort or pain. Some of the things that happen to us as a child are real.
Yes.
So some of the things are unjust. Some of the things are unfair. So it could be some real things that have happened to us, but also some misinterpretations that we make as a child. That becomes our story.
Can I just stop you there? Because that's an excellent point. We are never saying in the Wu Wei Wisdom model, these didn't happen to you. We're saying the opposite.
Yeah.
We're saying they did happen to you, but that does not make you a victim. I want to suggest to you that makes you victorious. I'm constantly amazed with my clients. They tell me stories that I could not believe that a child of that age could get through. I don't like to use the word survive because just the pure fact that they've got through that life situation makes them, in my eyes, amazing, awesome. That's when I say in my videos, I look in and I say, you are awesome. I'm not just making it up or just saying it. I really, truly believe it. If you have come through one of these dysfunctional childhoods, dysfunctional episodes, you are victorious. Well done. Well done. I don't know sometimes how you did it, but that proves to me of how great you are. That proves to me that somewhere in you, you have this, what we call Shen energy that carries you through. So that's such a good point, Alex. We are not and never would say this didn't happen. We are saying it did happen, but how you interpret it, how you view it,
and how you view yourself.
Absolutely.
I think that's the key. The
That's
key
the
thing.
key.
You are not. You may have experienced injustice. You may have experienced terrible things as a child, but it doesn't mean that you have to believe your story is I am now the victim for the rest of my life.
But from a child point of view, they cannot have the rationale that we can have now.
Yeah.
So it's perfectly reasonable and logical. It's a childlike logic, I sometimes call it, to blame themselves. So they have two disadvantages right at the beginning. First of all, they do not believe that they create the emotion, that they're the victim of the emotion. And then they believe that grown-ups are always right, kind of thing. So they have two disadvantages.
And so they locked. So I can see there's kind of stepping stones of how we get to the identity issue or the not being true to yourself issue. So we have these childhood experiences.
The story.
We then interpret them, and that becomes our childhood story. We hold on to that story.
Can I just talk about holding on? Because that's also very important. The way I see it when I'm talking to my clients, you have this, as Alex says, you have the event, the situation, the stimuli. You have your interpretation of that event, story. And I sometimes, when I'm working with a client, it seems to me it's like a balloon. And the air inside the balloon is the story. And what keeps the balloon is the emotion.
Okay.
So the child is stuck because they've got the story. And what keeps the story real and true to them is the emotion.
And they keep re-experiencing the emotion because they're looking through life now through the lens of the story, which then provides more and more evidence to confirm the story. So they experience the emotions again.
And more emotions.
And that keeps, as you say, it's kind of fuel to the fire of the story. And so over time then, does this story become more than the story? It becomes our identity.
And that's the key. So when you don't understand the basic teaching that you are the creator of your emotions, you are not the victim. Now, as you grow up, the confirmation bias or the self-fulfilling prophecy now starts to happen as you get older. Now you then believe your own story. Why wouldn't you? Because I can tell you, again, just yesterday working with a client, and this client's, well, in case they're watching, but they're in the 50s. They're not young. And we were talking about, in the UK, we have I don't think we have it now, but we used to have the 11 plus. When you were 11 years old and it decided which school you went to. And we were still talking about the impact that failing the 11 plus had on that child, because it's confirmation that they're not good enough. And he was telling me, this is the evidence. When I said, well, give me the evidence why you're not good enough. I failed the 11 plus. I said, what does that mean? Well, there's the evidence.
Why would, as adults, as mature adults, hold on to childlike evidence to reinforce a false identity?
Because now you've got a problem. Now you've got a story being held together by the emotions. Now you're creating your own emotions. And so what this does, this strengthens and concretes the story. Now the story becomes your identity. And this is the problem. And here's why it's so difficult to do the Wu Wei Wisdom work, and why a lot of the clients find it kind of really...
it butts up against the inner child.
Thank you.
The inner child is really stubborn and determined.
Really stubborn.
It's like the inner child is, am I right in thinking, David, the inner child is like in survival mood trying to protect its story?
Exactly.
And why?
Because
why does it want to desperately protect its story though, if it's really unhelpful and unhealthy?
No, because now it sees the story as his identity and it becomes personal.
Okay.
Now
it's really about them,
you
rather than what happened to you.
Exactly. So you now see yourself as, and we call it the 3 lies. You can probably repeat it with me. I'm not good enough. You don't say what happened to me when I was a child is not good enough.
Yeah.
You see, you've owned it. You've taken responsibility.
It's like you're not just talking about one experience or a series of experience or a relationship you had when you were a child with someone important to you. You're now saying, this is all of me. This is everything about me. Yeah. This is me to the core. Yes. If I was a stick of rock and you slice me, you would see I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable.
Exactly.
I can't cope, running right down the middle of me.
I'm unlovable. Not, oh, my mother thought I was unlovable. No, I'm unlovable. See how you made it personal. So when somebody comes to you, it's even now more than somebody talking to you. It's a personal attack on you. And so what does a child do? It digs in their heels, bunkers down, is ready for the fight. And so this is the problem. And then over time, again, don't forget, the self-fulfilling prophecy is still happening. So you're now thinking yourself, let's choose I'm not good enough. So if you enter into a situation, and again, we've done many videos on this because I'm a very strong believer in the law of attraction. If you enter into a situation, and it could be a career, it could be a job, it could be the way you look after your health, it could be exercise, it could be a relationship, it could be anything. But if you're entering in with the mindset and the identity that you're not good enough, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And there you go. Well, there you are. Look, there's the evidence, David. And I go, no, that's not evidence. That's the result of thinking you're not good enough. What's the evidence? And this is what I say. And I've said it on many videos. Were you born not good enough? And I'll ask you, were you born not good enough? And the answer has to be no, of course you're not. So this is something that you've inherited. This is something that you've taken on. Albeit as a child, you've taken it on. And now it's become your identity. And in a bizarre way, you defend it.
Well, I think you're right, because I don't want to use too many analogies, but what's just come into my mind is like, the Russian dolls where there's one doll inside of another doll inside of another doll. It's like, as adults, many of us can construct false or fake, untrue identities about who we really are. And so, for example, from what you've said, the tiniest doll inside at the core is the I'm not good enough identity. Then that's put inside a bigger doll, which is I'm unlovable, I can't cope, I can't manage, I'm not good enough.
I'm a victim.
And then that is then put inside another doll, which is more the kind of outward expression of who we are, which could be I'm a workaholic, or I'm a victim in all my relationships.
Or I eat too much, or I drink too much, or I work too much, or I don't work enough, or nobody ever appreciates me.
That's just the sort of person I am.
That's right.
But these are all fake identities. These are all, none of those is you. All of those fake identities spring from that tiniest little seed inside you, that smallest doll, if you like, which is, it must be me, there's something wrong with me.
And more importantly, though, Alex, all of that is fueled and supported by the teaching of, do you believe that you create your emotions? That's the key. And this is something not like, well, I'm 99% there, or I'm 50% there, or I'm 20%. No, do you believe it? Every emotion you create. And I'm not saying emotions are wrong. I am not saying you shouldn't create them. I'm saying they're healthy, they're well, please carry on, continue creating the emotions, but you are creating them. And these false identities are kind of held together with that emotional teaching.
Yeah, it's that we're running away from emotions that we're creating ourselves. Exactly. But we're working really, really hard to create all these fake identities and keep them all in place, keep another analogy, keep all the plates in the air. And if we, as you saying, the first step is if we accept that we are creating these emotions,
I believe
that then starts to undo the whole complex thing we've created, the complex web of lies.
So we've got a method called the golden thread. The golden thread process is like a self-inquiry. I always love what you said a few sessions ago. It's like Hansel and Gretel following the breadcrumbs. And you always start off with the beginning. When you experience a very powerful red light feeling, whether you want to call it anxiety, fear, scared, jealousy, whatever you want to call it, I would prefer you to call it a red light feeling. I am now creating a red light feeling. That's what I would prefer you to say. Because then you can say, why? Why am I now choosing to create this feeling? And it could be absolutely logical and correct and nothing wrong with it. Normally it's not. And then you can do the self-inquiry. And using your analogies, now you're taking out the Russian dolls and you're going down through to get to the first belief, what you believe about yourself, because that's the filter. Now, the inner child will push you away at every level because the inner child loves familiarity. It thinks it's easier. I wish I had $1 for every client who said to me, well, it's easier. Well, it's easier to give in. It's easier to go along with it. It's easier not to do anything. It's easier not to fight. It's easier to surrender.
David, do you think that so we're working hard to keep up this story, it's the fake identity, it's manifesting in different ways. So we could be a workaholic, we could be believing we're a victim in our relationship or a victim in our friendships. There's all sorts of stories that people run their lives on. We're working really, really hard. We keep on experiencing painful, uncomfortable red light emotions because this story is fake. It's not who we are. Yes. The emotions are telling us you're living a lie. You're not being true to yourself. Yes. But our inner child basically thinks, actually, these emotions, I need to work even harder at maintaining my fake identity. I need to work even harder to hide the fact that I believe I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I can't cope. So I've got to work harder at work. I've got to desperately look around for someone who loves me and gives me enough validation, but I never seem to get enough validation. Exactly. So when the inner child experiences the red light emotions, it kind of pulls in the opposite direction that we should be pulling in.
Exactly, Alex. And so the inner child, and this is what I've always said, the inner child is not a devil. It's not a demon. It's not against you. It's not a monster. It's not trying to screw up your life. It's a child of about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 who's trying its best. I've done this work for so many years now, and I always say, I've done thousands of golden threads. I've found thousands of inner children. I've never found a monster. I've always found a wonderful child huddled up in a corner, scared stiff. And what they want is someone just to go and sit down with them, hold their hand, talk to them, but more importantly, answer them. Answer their questions. And I can tell you that is my number one job. When we've done the golden thread, when we've gone through all the little squabbles and fights and we've got down to the core, I just answer the child's question. Try and give it the truth, the honesty, because that's the answer out of this, you see. I know you're going to ask me, how do we get out of this?
Well, I'm going to ask you, how do we get from... Say if I come to you and I say, David, I am so stressed with my work. I'm unhappy. To be honest with you, I'm really unhappy. I work too long hours, but it's just who I am. But I am like suffering from complete burnout. I'm just a workaholic. That's my identity.
So it would be that type of thing that people would come and see me. So you see, they've already identified that they're creating a feeling of stress. They probably won't agree that they've created a feeling of stress. But what in your role play there, Alex, you've already agreed and identified that you're burnt out. So my obvious first question is, why do you choose to burn yourself out?
Well, because I believe I have to work hard because it's the right thing for me to do.
And where
to earn money and to provide for my family and climb the ladder at work, you know.
So you believe that getting burnt out is the best way to support your family and climb the ladder at work?
Well, I can see that I'm been neglecting my family because I'm spending so many times, but it's almost like I can't, there's a part of me that just won't get off the treadmill.
And so if a client or you say that, then that's the inner child.
So that's where we get to the inner child. So this is if I was the workaholic, this is my inner child driving my identity as a career go-getter, spending too many hours in the office.
So I'm So if this is you that Alex is role playing, I'm not diagnosing you. I'm just giving you a general thing. In my experience, if that was a client, my first thought would be the inner child here has now come to a kind of a conclusion, a solution. If it jumps on the wagon wheel, on the hamster's wheel, runs as fast as it can, and be as successful as it can, earns as more money as it can, then other people will give it a validation. It's actually not after financial, it's actually after emotional validation, worth. And so I would be now trying to speak to that inner child who's just showed herself to me. Beautiful little girl, sweat coming off her brow, running as fast as she can as on the hamster's wheel, trying her best, very focused, and doesn't want to listen to me at the moment. So I've now got to try and contact that child and talk to that child. Because that child, and here's another great quality of the inner child and you, determination. Sometimes that determination, we talk about the pendulum, think about a pendulum swinging from left to right. One of the great benefits of the inner child is the determination. Unfortunately, it can swing one way and become just downright stubbornness, very stubborn, willful. It will dig its heels in. It will not want to listen. When a child goes, talk to the hand, blah, 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 I'm not listening to you. That's what your inner child would do. But at the same time, and almost within a split second, it will swing to the other end of the pendulum and it will throw its hands up in despair and go, well, I might as well give in there. Nobody loves me. Nobody appreciates me. Look at me. I'm wearing my fingers to the bone. And I'm going to come to you, David, because my husband doesn't realize, my wife doesn't realize I'm working 18 hours a day and I come home and she moans at me or he moans at me. And so this is out of control now because you're being driven. Your inner child has got her hands or his hands on your steering wheel of life and it's driving your car and you're out of control. And because of this has now become your identity. And as you said, when you were doing the role play, when you ask somebody, they'll say, well, it's my nature. It's the way I am. It's how we know just who I am. I can't change it. But this is nonsense because you're in control, aren't you? Shouldn't you be in control?
Should be.
And that's the key of these life lessons, is to get you in control. And to understand. I have a very important saying I say to my clients, you cannot change what you don't understand because you're in a maze. And that's why we do these life lessons. So you can do this work. You don't need me. You can do this work. You can go down your golden thread. You can find your inner child and you can reparent your inner child correctly. We've done many videos, if you look in the archives, on reparenting the inner child. And I would never blame your physical parents. But what I will say is perhaps their parenting skills left a little bit to be desired. And if that's the case for you, then you have to step in and you have to parent yourself. You have to parent that part of your mind. I'm sorry to talk such a lot, but this is so important. And you have to parent it with truth, honesty, and integrity. And that's the way you break this and change your identity. Instead of running around a kind of a hamster's wheel maze and getting deeper and deeper and being led by your emotions, so many of my clients make decisions not from their thinking, not from their beliefs, from this false identity, and more importantly, their emotions. And that's why it never works out right. That's why they keep on getting the negative results.
Or they keep getting the red light emotions because if we are unsatisfied, unhappy, exhausted, then this is the result of driving ourselves, living our life based on that childhood lie that the inner child is clinging to. So can I just ask though, in the case of, say, the workaholic, their inner child is holding on to the story, the lie that they're not good enough, they're not lovable. And so they're trying to prove themselves. The whole identity and the reason why they get out of bed in the morning and the thing they think about before they go to sleep at night is all about, how am I going to prove myself? How am I going to work harder to prove myself to get the validation?
Yes, and that inner child, I will tell you, would absolutely hate what we call CCJ. Being criticized, being compared, or being judged. They hate that. So they would have come up with a childlike scheme. Well, if I was perfect, if I did everything better than everyone else, then I would get the value that I badly need. And of course, this doesn't work, as Alex said. So they jump back on the hamster's wheel, jump back on what I call the carousel of despair, because that's familiar. There's no one there to tell them, hey, baby, hang on, stop, take a breath, drop your shoulders, because they're right on it. And then they use the emotions and they'll tell you about their emotions. I'm stressed. I think you said in your introduction, I'm so stressed, you don't realize. I'm at the end of my tether. And all they want to talk about is their emotions, because they know then you surrender, you let them carry on. And that's the problem. And what I find as well, and is this you, that I find many of my clients treat themselves much harsher, much worse than they was ever treated. They do it to themselves. They've almost become a mirror of the parent or the event or the situation, criticizing themselves. And this is the carousel of despair. And they go round and around and around. And that's why we do these lessons, to say, take a step back, go through these life lessons. We've got many of them. Choose a subject that are interested with you. Do the golden thread nice and steady. Do not, and I say to my clients, when you're doing this work, one tip I'll say you, stop using the word I feel. Ban that word when you're doing the work. Replace it with I think, I choose, I believe. And what that does, that gives you ownership. So instead of saying I feel stressed, you can say I choose to be stressed. And you'll immediately see.
And then you ask why.
That's right.
Why am I choosing to do this?
But the inner child will push back on that. I'm not choosing this. I'm not choosing this. They're doing this. It's because of this. But once you change that word and use a word that puts the responsibility back to you and not being a victim, not being weak, then you'll see that challenges your identity and that gives you a big shake.
So I can put links in the show notes to many of our inner child reparenting teachings and also the golden thread process teachings, which will help you with this, I guess, this self-inquiry process to move from the surface level emotions down to the inner child story. Now, when we...
And can I just do the life lesson on this?
Yeah.
Just while you're thinking of the next question. So the life lesson on this is very important. Truth, honesty, integrity. Do not go to the results of what you're thinking. Go to why you think it. And again, I'm going to repeat what I say in all of the videos. Or what do you believe? Why do you believe it?
And when you say that though, David, what you mean is go to the original...
That's right.
The original point in time that you started to believe that I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable,
Exactly.
I can't cope.
Exactly.
So not the outcome or the result of continually thinking that we're not good enough, we're unlovable, we can't cope. What is the original point in time that made you decide as a child, most typically, that you weren't good enough?
Can I tell you, Alex, that's the most important teaching. And I think I repeat that to every client and they still find it hard to accept it. unless you're telling me that I was born not good enough. And many clients will laugh and say, well, I probably was, but they know that you wasn't. So that's not being honest. You see, that's why that honesty, truth, integrity is very important. And as Alex says, go to the first point. In many cases, I can't diagnose you, but in many cases, it's what somebody in authority said to you, a parent, a teacher, a sibling, a grandparent, an auntie, somebody that you cared for, somebody you trusted, somebody you loved, and they said it to you, and then you used it as part of the story. The story then creates the emotions then firm up and concrete into the identity.
So when we've done the inner child work, we've looked at the original evidence, the original reason why we believe we're not good enough. We believe those lies. And we explain the truth to our inner child. It's not about you, it was about them, or it was you've misunderstood what happened, or that person, what they did was wrong, but it doesn't define you. You've done all those teachings. So does that then mean that the story, the false identity, then just naturally falls away?
That's a great.
And what do we replace it with? Does our kind of authentic self then just pop up and appear?
That's such a great question. What it does in the first day, it doesn't just fall away and disappear the next day. But what it does, it doesn't have so much impact, so much power, because now you're starting to question it. And if you use that analogy of the balloon is now softening. The balloon is now a little bit more pliable. And this is when you have to talk to your inner child. You have to answer the questions. And this is what we call Shen, or spirituality, whatever you want to call it. And that's why I believe this truth, honesty, and integrity is so important. And I'm always talking to my clients about this. Tell me what you believe. Tell me why you believe it. Don't give me an excuse. Just tell me. If I ask you a question, try and answer. And then what you're doing, and surprisingly, Alex, it only takes about a month. If you could spend about 15 or 20 minutes a day working on this truth, that it's absolutely true what you're telling your child. So when it says, so if your child says, for instance, well, Mummy, Daddy said I wasn't good enough, or one I had yesterday, well, if my Daddy would have loved me, he wouldn't have left, would he? Now, that is a typical inner child scenario of a breakup of a relationship.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with the inner child, but the inner child's perception is all about them.
Yeah.
So now, this is what I often say to my clients. This is why I love the analogy of the inner child. It's not perfect, but it's a good analogy. Imagine that this is you're the spiritual parent, and your spiritual child comes to you and says, well, Daddy wouldn't have left, would he? Unless there's something wrong with me. What would you say to that child? And that's the teachings you've got to give that child. Yeah. Now, is that difficult? Absolutely. That's really difficult. And that's why a lot of people duck out. Yeah. Because they don't want to have that conversation. And that's what the conversation, if they come to me, that's the conversation I do want to have. Yeah. Because that will change your life. Because now you're widening the perception, because the child sees that incident of Daddy leaving home, Mummy and Daddy arguing, trying my best to keep the family together. Oh, Daddy's left. If he really loved me, he wouldn't have left, would he? See, childlike logic.
So that child's story becomes, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough. So then our inner child story becomes, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough. And then that person builds their whole life off that identity.
And then that becomes the identity. And for this client then, her story was, I must be in a relationship. I cannot be rejected. I cannot be lonely. She created so many scenarios of getting old, lonely, based when we did the golden thread, based on that episode.
And ironically, that story, which becomes the identity, then invokes the law of attraction.
Absolutely. And then you attract other people into your life that is more likely to happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we're doing the golden thread, it's like a deconstruction. You're deconstructing the story, and you can't just take it apart, because the inner child will hold on to it, because for them it's like a lifebelt, and they think they're going to drown, and you have to speak to them. Those difficult subjects, you have to talk to them, you have to give them the education, you have to listen to what they say in response. I would say doing 15 minutes a day, I would call that a meditation. For me, meditation is focusing your mind, sitting quietly and going through these episodes that we call life lessons, so you can now learn a better lesson. And then what you do then is you construct a new story. And the beauty about this, Alex, if we say, and I think you would agree, that the inner child loves familiarity, it loves to know what's going to happen. Once you've gone through this change, this deconstruction and reconstruction, then the new story becomes familiar.
Yeah.
And then it just accepts it.
And I guess, David, so we do the deconstruction by doing the golden thread process, doing the inner child work, speaking the truth to the inner child, not letting the child carry on with the same old lie. We then reconstruct our identity.
We re-educate.
Re-educate the child.
And then reconstruct.
But to be honest, I'm wondering, I'm thinking, does it really matter what our identity is, so long as it's based on truth, honesty, and integrity?
Absolutely.
So my identity, your identity could be completely different to the next person, to the next. Nobody is right, wrong, better, worse, or whatever, so long as we're being true to ourselves.
And I would go one step further, but you don't have to. Connected to your Shen, connected to that non-material part of you that always knows what is the right thing. That
deep
gut feeling,
yes,
that deep spirituality. And I think you've always known that, else you wouldn't be listening to us. You know, and I think everybody knows that deep inner knowing. And that's how I want you to live. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with Alex. But you do have to agree with yourself. And that's the life lesson.
Brilliant, David. And we've also done a series of teachings on the spiritual self and connecting to the spiritual self, that Shen part of you. And I guess how that forms a vital part of the reality of our identity as human beings, but spiritual beings as well. And so I will put links to those teachings in the show notes. We've been on quite a journey on this teaching, and I hope it has helped you, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do comment and let us know what you think. Share it with someone else who you think may also benefit. If you'd like to work one-to-one with David on any of the issues we talked about today, David works by video call with clients all over the world every week. And I will put a link below to learn more about David's sessions. And finally, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, because we produce new videos every week, and we would love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.